Wiz here, DC Customs. Basically what we're going to do today is we're going to do a customer's fairing. What we're going to do is it's already been base coated, the customer already had it done. The difference is that his front fender was already done by somebody else, by another custom painter or something. This is really not my style of flames. These are stenciled flames. They're like what they call real fire, but they're using a stencil. On most of my real fire jobs, what I do is I end up taking and freehanding the real fire. But in order for me to match up this paint job, I am going to do a more realistic skull that's in the center of this picture, which probably is not as visible through the camera, but it's worked in with the flames. I'm going to start on the front of this fairing with the realistic fire the way they did it, and then I'm going to gradually change into my style of flames as it goes up further into the flame job. That way there I can incorporate my own style in with the style that this artist used. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the front of this fairing, and at the front edges of this fairing I'm going to use their style of flames. When I get about probably a third of the way up on the fairing, I'm going to change into my style of flames, which I'll do gradual. That way there it'll be more realistic to me. And then the skull I'm going to do more 3D, so it looks more realistic. I have a feeling after I do this, the customer may want me to go back onto the fender and do my style over the top of this. This has been basically what I've run into on several other occasions when I've done my work. I don't try to out detail the artist that did this. It's just my style is to add more detail, more shading on. But we'll get started on this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over and cut some stencils first, and I'll kind of show you how they do these flames and what kind of stencils they use for them. Now what I'll do is I'm going to take an ink pen here, and I'm going to cut a couple designs like they use, and this will create basically some of the shapes that they have on there. And I'll take my X-Acto knife. When you're cutting these, you want to make as smooth a move as you can if you're going to make this style of stencil, because you don't want any sharp edges or any stops. So the idea would be to use kind of a fluid motion with the X-Acto knife, continuing to move it. If you have to move the paper, that's good, but you want to kind of keep it in contact at all times. And what I've created here is a style of stencil that has the different rounds to it, and these rounds will create some of the actual rounds, and the negative part will also create some of the rounds. So I'll use these two pieces. I'm going to cut one more just for a couple flame licks, which are going to be just some small basically edges and stuff. Alright, what I'm going to start doing here is I'm going to start making a couple of these flame licks using the stencil. And as you can see, I'm getting the same type of holes like I have in this paint job here in this area. And I'll use some freehanding when I go in here to kind of create the effects. Then I'll take this and actually do a couple of other overlays. Now what we want to remember is that these flames are coming off here, but we want to give them a backwards motion, so they look like they're moving off the front of the fairing. So we're going to use a motion area on here to where we're going to constantly be thinking that the flames are working themselves backwards off this fairing. And by doing that, we'll be able to create the effect. Now what I've been doing is using these two different styles of round areas. And you'll see how even though we do them that way, some of these other areas that are curved will give us areas that actually create basically depth holes and overlaps. Now what I'm doing here is I'm basically creating these round holes and causing the flames to shoot in a backwards motion off the front of this fairing. What we want to do is we want to angle these back off the fairing. Too many guys make the mistake and go uphill with the flames on the fairing, and then they go back on the top, which you have this clash of flames that don't really make sense. Even though fire would come, if it was in a fire pit, would come up. If it was on the front of a fairing and it hit the front of the fairing, flames would basically come back, basically in the same wind movement that a fairing would create. So I always try to create like the flames coming off the front of the fairing. And I'm using the stencil that I had cut earlier, and then creating these big wide areas that they have on here, and trying to get the same effect that they have on there. And like I said, I'm going to go basically, after I start on this area here, I'm going to go to the other side of the fairing and work some of that flame area in there, and then within that area I'm hoping to start in doing my realistic flames the way I do them, or basically without having to use the stencils as much. Now in this particular setup here, the way I've got these flames set up now, I'm actually using the stencil a little bit less as I get towards the back here, and starting to freeform my own style of flame. My own style isn't too much different than what they've used on these stencils, except I don't like to use a stencil as a hard edge, because too many of the times you get this rounded edge that actually is so sharp that it does look like a stencil and retains a stencil. A flame usually has a soft edge to it. It doesn't retain that style. And I like to wisp the tails a little bit more. Sometimes I just run a shoot or something across there and give it just a slight edge of where you don't have a definite hard edge. You have kind of a softer edge there. And by me doing it this way, it gives me basically the ability to work into their design. What I'm doing here is I'm taking and working this flame pattern up, and I'm actually getting some of the edges a little softer as I raise towards where my goal is to put the skull right in here. The skull will be in this area right here, be a little darker shades than what originally, and the flames will work up into the skull, so you'll have kind of the flames overriding the skull's face. Not too much farther off than what they did in the original picture, but instead of having the skull just one color to where you couldn't see it, and this is what the artist was trying to accomplish, just a one color kind of skull. But my idea for the guy was to bring a little bit more dimension, since the fairing's a bigger area, up higher, more visible than the fender. I thought we'd incorporate that, and he was fine with what basically we discussed. Otherwise I could have done exactly like this, but he wanted a little more detail into it, so that's what we're going to do when we do this skull up here. Now I've taken the liberty of basically getting this whole side done and working around, and we're pretty close to it. The only difference is in that I will work a little bit of oranges into that flame so that it takes on a little bit different area. I'm going to do this side right now, and then bring that up into there. And we're going to, like I said, we're going to still use the same type of method. We're going to use the stencil theory here. But as you notice, I'm still working these flames back towards the back and not uphill on this. I'm working them basically so we have, I'm saying, a lot of these are just freehand flames that I'm doing off here, kind of to give it just a little bit more of an effect. So we have the idea of the flames coming back